Thank you. Firstly, I should say we have an opportunity for revenge here. So Brindan Suresh is one of our panelists from McKinsey. So just shows that what goes around comes around. You need to be very careful in your career. Before we start...
I'm actually a secret protector.
Okay. What we want to do in the next hour or so is make this very interactive. So part of the plan here is to talk about what is this people gap within the biotech market. And biotech covers quite a large sphere. So that includes diagnostics, healthcare, agri-tech, and other areas too. So if you think, oh, I'm not sure I fit within the biotech space, I'm more medical devices, or I'm not sure where I'm going in my career at the moment, don't worry. I also know you stole my story about Vihap over there, about his passion to wanting to be a pilot, and now ending up in Switzerland within the sector. And what was lovely last night, I think I could see Glenn here. Sean, are you here too? Hearing last night about the passion of the people who are here. And back to the leaders of today, which you all are, if you've got that passion already, that's going to make a big difference. And what was interesting last night is the journey from A to B that we were looking at earlier. You've got a kind of pre-journey that's already happened. And some of you have already made those adaptations and changes. And what we're going to be talking about over the next hour or so, or next half an hour, I'm going to introduce each of the speakers. They're going to tell you a little bit about their backgrounds. I'll give you a bit of an introduction first. Then they're going to spend a few minutes just explaining why they made decisions they made, the areas they work in. And just to give you a heads up, we've got 4 different sort of representatives of sectors. We've got a founder and a biotech entrepreneur. We've got an HR specialist from one of the top pharma in the world, who's also got a background in the likes of Cisco and GE. We've got a headhunter and recruiter who works across science, chemical, engineering, and we've also got a McKinsey consultant who used to be as well a physician in Australia. So we've got a mixed panel here. It's a great panel. Just thought I'd mention that again.
I bet she's from Melbourne. Sydney. Oh my God.
Okay. But the transition piece is important, and really it's to give you all opportunity to ask questions. They're going to be things specific to you in your careers that as you hear people talk, you'll think, I just want to pick up on that. So we're going to give you plenty of time to go over those things. My own background, just very briefly, before I ended up doing what I'm doing now, I was a teacher. And much like Reg was saying, and it was such a good introduction, I was teaching 5-6 years, pretty comfortable as a teacher, then had a personal situation with my mother being sick in the US, had to get her in hospice care. You can't just leave a classroom and say, you carry on reading that book, I'll be back in 2 weeks. So I had to make a decision. And that decision meant I thought, well, you know what, I'm near the end of my range in teaching, my pay scale. Maybe I'll look at something else. And in the process of traveling back to the US, meeting people, seeing what was going on within the biotech market and other things out there, I came back to the UK, went to see someone with my CV saying, what do I do next? They gave me some ideas. I got nowhere with those ideas, first of all. I went back again and said, that's not working. And they said, hypothetically, why don't you come work with me? I'm setting up a recruitment company. And it will be within this life science space. And here I am 18 years later. So that transition, that need to be adaptable is so true. And the point about travel as well, we see it all the time, and I'm sure we'll touch on it. But we see all the time now that people want above-country experience. So those of you who've already got 2 or 3 countries under your belt, fantastic. If you want to remain in the sector and go higher up the rankings, continue to do that while you can. I had a great example not that long ago. I'm married, I've got 2 children. And what was really interesting, a role came up where I could head up our Singapore office at the company I was in. My wife's law firm, they had a Singapore office. We could do this, we'll both go. We discussed it over the weekend. I went in on Monday, the boss saying, you know what, I want to consider this as an option. And they said, 3 people have already put their names forward and we're interviewing them today, so I'm sorry you're a bit late. And what it taught me was actually, we needed to have had that discussion before that weekend. And if we'd made that decision before, we would have known to go. And then we said, you know what, we're going to stay. That's okay. And we made that decision to stay. But each of you will have different decision-making to go throughout your career. So let me start with where I'm at, and let me just introduce you briefly to everybody. You will know from the speakers at the top, and I won't give too much for some. I'm just going to give an overview of each of them, and then they will tell you their background. So first of all, delighted, Adina Mangubat, is that correct? Okay. So she's come over from the US, the founder of Spiral Genetics, background in science and actually management as well. She was involved in 2 high-tech companies before doing what she is now, involved very much in the bioinformatics and innovation space. Now, her experience, of course, is all about how do you keep an area like that is changing day by day. How do you retain staff? How do you bring them in? Do you bring in people with a science background? Do you bring in people from a non-science and train them up? And I know, having overheard some of the things Adina's already spoken about, she's got a lot of insight there, so she'll be giving you a heads up on that. And then we have Fiona Cicconi, is that correct? Cicconi. I was practicing it too. So background, again, big corporate experience too, worked at GE, and having moved from GE, she went to Cisco within telecoms, moved to Roche, and then more recently in 2014, moved to AstraZeneca, helping create what they call a great place to work. And I know her experience, both retaining talent, bringing it in from other markets, managing that talent for those sorts of organizations, is very different from Adina, so you'll get a really nice contrast. And then, as I said earlier, you've got Richard. So Richard's background in forensic science, is that correct, to start with? Before, again, moving into recruitment. No one starts out wanting to do recruitment. We end up here, so be nice to us. That's all I'm saying. Richard then has been involved in recruitment now for 14 years plus. His background working through operations, so he manages people, he manages a team. SRG is one of the biggest search companies in the UK, placing particularly within science, chemical, engineering, and so on, making up to 1,000 placements a year. That's a lot of people that go through that business, that he looks after, that he manages and manages the clients. So again, he's going to have a perspective about where you're on that path and where you want to go. And then again, Brindan Suresh, having had a very tough time before he came to the panel, now has an opportunity to get his own back. So background, as I said, in a physician in Australia, working in clinical medicine, then moved across to McKinsey, and actively involved as a partner at McKinsey in medical affairs, in managing, working with pharmaco companies, helping them get products to market, advising, and giving good consulting advice. So we've got a really interesting background. And what I'm going to do now is sit down and give them each 7 minutes or so to just talk through their backgrounds, what they see as the big issues. Then I'll ask a few questions to get things moving and then open the floor to you. So get those questions ready. Thank you. Adina.
All right. So a little bit of a correction is that I actually don't have like a serious science background. I got a Bachelor of Science in Psychology, so it's science, but it's not a science in the same way that you guys are doing science, right? And you also might be surprised to know that, like, so that's what I got my degree in. No background in biology. My biology, like, formal training was all done, like, in high school. And no background in computer science either. So a lot of times I get the question, like, well, how did you end up starting a bioinformatics company, given that you have zero actual experience in that industry? And I think that, you know, if you take anything away from, like, what I say today, it's really that you can make your own path, whatever it is that you decide you want to do. And your specific credentials or any of those things are not actually the limiting factor in what you decide you want to do. So I started Spiral Genetics when I was a student at the University of Washington. I was in my senior year. I was 22, and I'd been involved in 2 startups while I was in college. One in home automation, and one in kind of smart grid green tech. And both of those were super interesting. It's like where I got infected with the startup bug and really realized that I could create anything that I wanted. But neither one of them really moved the dial in terms of how I wanted to contribute to humanity. Like, you know, turning your lights on and off with your cell phone is cool, right? But it doesn't actually make a difference for people. And smart grid was closer, but it only had applications in certain areas. And so as you kind of heard yesterday, you know, I was really interested in healthcare because I'd had a number of personal, like, experiences, you know, through my family with the healthcare system and how limited it was. And so I was really interested in how do we totally transform humanity's relationship with disease. And I was very fortunate in that I met Becky Dries, who was my first co-founder, a molecular biologist PhD out of Berkeley. She was a non-matriculated student at the University of Washington. She just happened to be in my course. And she had this idea for a genetic analysis company, and we won a business plan competition. This is 2009. The economy was in the toilet. And I had a Bachelor of Science in Psychology. And so, it was this moment where, well, what am I going to choose? I can choose to go find a job, or I can choose to go make a job. And make a job sounded like more fun. And it was in some aspects, and then it wasn't in others, right? But I mean, I didn't know anything really when I was starting my company. I mean, it was like even the very basics of how to, like what kind of company structure should I have? Or how do I choose a lawyer? Or how do I interview people? Because I'd never interviewed people before. How do I fire people? Had to learn that one fast. I'm serious because it took me, so I had my chief scientist, right, Becky, but we looked for a chief technology officer, like somebody that could actually code things for 9 months. We went through 6 CTOs looking for like the right person. And as you were saying, where'd she go? As the person that introduced us was saying, you pick your co-founders very carefully, and I mean, it's very much like choosing a spouse, I think, because you're going to spend like huge amounts of time with these people, so you better like them, and you better be able to do conflict resolution with them. And the people that I've chosen to go like with me on this journey have actually made, I think, all of the difference, because startups are really hard a lot of the time. They really are. I mean, nobody tells you in the beginning that, and so, here, I'm going to give you this to you so that way you know. Nobody tells you in the beginning that when you start a company, you are going to get close to running out of money multiple times. I think Spiral's on about 5 at this time. And you can ask any entrepreneur in the world. I mean, Matt, how many times have you gotten close to running out of money? Like it happens all the time. And so like the people that you bring with you on the journey make all the difference, because as you get close to that edge, how do they react? How do they deal with that kind of stress? How transparent can you be with those people? And how do I get to the place where I'm comfortable enough to just be super, super honest about exactly where the company is at any given moment? And so the people aspect, I think, is actually the most important part of the company. None of it would be possible without it. And how you select and how you train and the culture of the place that you're creating, I think, is it's the most important part. Spiral would not be where it is without all of the people that we've had along the way and the trust that they've given me. So I can certainly talk about how to become an entrepreneur, or how to choose your co-founders, or how to pick people that are going to be great for startups, or any of those things. I can also talk about the issues around bioinformatics and the fact that it's a totally new field, and so finding people that can actually work inside of the company is super tricky. I mean, there's not a lot of super deep computer scientists that also know a ton about biology or vice versa. And so finding all those people can be tricky. So happy to talk about all of those kinds of things.
Over to me. I think I'm going to have to stand up, because I'm half Italian and I use my hands a lot. I can't sit in an armchair and be all proper. So hello, my name's Fiona Cicconi. I'm half English, half Italian. And I started in AstraZeneca in September 2014. I never thought I was going to join pharma at all, because pharma for me was that big pharma, and often actually the reputation of pharma companies isn't great, so biotech is all sexy, but pharma actually is not. But I started in GE Oil and Gas for about 8 years, and this was a fantastic management. Sorry if I sometimes turn around. So it was a fantastic management experience. It was during the days of Jack Welch. You had to be absolutely, really, really prepared in order to even survive. I became a bit of a, quite a strong HR professional, a bit of a corporate warrior, maybe not a good thing, but you just have to be really, really prepared. So, during GE, I had various experiences, and I really, really learned a lot. When, after about 8 years, I was contacted by Cisco. No career plan. I've never had a career plan, by the way. I've only known what I needed to develop, my strengths and weaknesses, more or less, and I've always had managers who have been quite clear with me and direct, which has helped me a lot. Very hard sometimes, but it's helped me a lot, but no career plan. So, somebody I knew called me up in Cisco and said, why don't you come to Cisco and do HR there? There's many ex-GE people. It's, new economy, and this was 2002. And I was like, oh, I love GE. What am I going to do? And at that moment, GE had asked me, I was part of this due diligence team, and had asked me to go to Newcastle to be HR director for this company that GE had just bought. And I had 2 small kids, 1 and 3 years old. My husband's an astrophysicist, and I was really nervous. And this other company, Cisco, gave me the possibility not to move at that time. So I said, well, so there was a personal component here. So I ended up going to Cisco. I thought, well, let's try in this startup, more of a startup environment. I realized not as small and startup as yours, but Cisco was sort of a startup with respect to GE. And I went there, and I thought, well, let's see if you're any good at all, because in GE you have 5-class industrial relations, 5-class leadership development in Crottonville and everything. So let's see if you're any good at all. So I worked in Cisco for a while, for just over 3 years. And I liked it. I mean, there was no paper at all. No paper in the whole of the company. Nobody uses paper. It was amazing. Everything really, really fast. But I have to say that if you work in human resources, you like to be able to have a long cycle. We like to sort of draw all these castles and mountains in the air. These are the skills that I need to bring in the future. This is where the business is going, and therefore I need to build and develop people for the long term. And Cisco was like weekly, tack, 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 tack. Hire, fire, hire, fire. It's like, no. I want to develop people. I love developing talent for the long term. And therefore, got a call from Roche, pharmaceutical company, going through huge transformation, from a primary care sort of company to more an oncology. What ended up, at the moment, is more of an oncology hematology company. And I really, I think the person I interviewed with at the time would still tell you today, I really drilled I was being interviewed, but I really questioned ethics, integrity, how do you promote, how do you manage budgets, what does marketing mean in a pharma company? Because for me, and at this point I was already, in my 40s, and so I knew very clearly, even though not exactly what position I wanted to do, what's important for me. And this is, I think, is just one thing that you should reflect about, because I think, working for a company that has strong values, or especially if you work in human resources, values that are similar to yours is really important, right? Because, even though I love Cisco, I love the culture, I found it difficult with this slight immaturity with people, you're a high performer, you're a low performer, you're a high performer. So, no, hang on, if you're working in human resources, you need to have strong values to be able to develop people. Sometimes people go through difficult moments, but you help them out, you help them improve, not a hire fire sort of culture. So a long interview and selection process in Roche. I joined Roche, absolutely loved it. I was in Italy, then I moved to Basel, moved my family. My husband gave up his career for the second time. And the kids moved to Basel. I have 2 kids. And we had a fantastic time, and part of the merger with Genentech and Roche. It was really interesting, wonderful company. And then the CEO for AstraZeneca contacted me and said, Fiona, there's a selection process for a head of HR. Would you be interested? I said, no. I'm very happy in Basel, don't want to move again. Do you really have a pipeline of products anyway? Roche, always been very direct. And he said, why don't you just try, what's wrong with you? I'm only asking you to interview, go through the selection process. So I spoke to my husband, another move. I have to give up my career a 3rd time. So please. Okay, let me just try. And what happened during the selection process was I met some really amazing people. I met Bahija, so that's Reg's manager. I really loved the genuine feel of the people I met. Again, the values, very important. And ended up joining and ended up being selected. Always incredible. Why would I be selected? Amazing. But so that's typically maybe feminine. But so was selected for the role and started in September 2014. So that's a little bit my career. The kids moved to Cambridge. We moved to Cambridge because it's our new global headquarters. I had to plant the flag of the new global headquarters of AstraZeneca here in Cambridge. We moved here. The kids were 14 and 16 in completely different programs. Left all of their friends, went from a school with 70 different nationalities to, at that point, Pfizer had just come in and tried to take over AstraZeneca. Then they'd gone away, but it was June. My offer came through in June. All the good schools were full in Cambridge, so they ended up in Ely, King's Ely. It's actually a fantastic school, but you go from 70 different nationalities to Ely, it's kind of hard, but they're in sort of like a school built by Henry VIII and one thing and another, so it's all a wealth of experience for them. But really, family is actually quite important, when you make these choices. Really, very quickly about AstraZeneca. Sorry. 60,000 employees are in 100 different countries. Our strategy is all about achieving scientific leadership, returning to growth with these new products, and building a great place to work, and which is something that obviously I have specific interest in, but obviously everybody is involved in trying to build a great place to work. And we'll talk more about the talent shortages, but it's absolutely important because you are the ones who will decide whether AstraZeneca is a great place to work or not. The employees decide. It's not something that we can do top down. And achieving scientific leadership, we have actually moved our headquarters here to Cambridge. We're building a new headquarters on the biomedical campus near to Adam Brooks Hospital, where we've got the Laboratory for Molecular Biology, Cancer Research UK, Papworth Hospital. And the idea is to have like a pharma company which is very porous and transparent. We have over 500 collaborations and partnerships where people can come in, the general public can come in, they can have a look at our labs. So once upon a time, you used to have pharma companies with 3 rows of barbed wire fences around it. This is going to be a global R&D headquarters which is open to collaboration, porous, because we think that's how you get innovation. Thank you very much.
I did bring my stopwatch just in case. I was refereeing at the weekend. I was tempted to bring a whistle, but I thought, we've got it covered. So no, it's good. I always said recruitment's just bigger kids, same issues. So, this is normal.
Very true.
Yeah. So, Richard, over to you. Thank you, Fiona.
Thanks, Fiona. So very briefly, a little bit about myself. So Tarquin mentioned before, I used to work in forensic science. I graduated in microbiology and genetics, joined forensic science and was working on DNA analysis for about 5 years. Which sounds really fantastic, and you watch CSI programs and all those kind of things, and it's nothing like that at all. But there was a period of time where you'd read a newspaper and I'd see a case that had just happened and go into the laboratory and work on that particular piece of DNA that day. And it was great, it was really exciting, but soon enough, for me, I wanted something that was more commercial. I wanted a role where if I put more effort in, I would get some rewards out. My first job I got through SRG, the organisation that I work for now. So I've seen the candidate side of the experience. I was a hiring manager within that organisation and I recruited through SRG. So the logical place to go to, and Tarquin mentioned that people just fall into recruitment, which is pretty true, was for me to come to the third side, and that is to join SRG as a recruitment consultant. The parts that I want to talk about today, being from the sort of agency side, is really to try and give you an idea of some of how I see the skills gaps within the industry at the moment. And then also to talk a little bit, and Fiona mentioned about sort of the values side of things, but the values and behaviours side that I see as a recruiter that is important for people to recognise when they are looking for their career moves. So the skills gaps. I've split this into 4 sides. So if we sort of look firstly at discovery and research, and Adina mentioned about sort of her background, not being in computer science and not being biologist, but yet recruiting people within bioinformatics. And that area of discovery and research is a huge skills gap in many ways. People who have got both the computational biology skills and the bioinformatics backgrounds is quite often a challenge for us as recruiters and for organisations like AstraZeneca to hire. Secondly, within that sort of discovery and research perspective is things like personalised medicines. And I know the keynote from last night was talking about personalised medicines and having a companion diagnostic to the drug to be making sure that the drug is given to the right patient at the right time. And so those people that have the genomics background and proteomics and biomarker discovery and those kind of things are of value, certainly to industry at the moment. The second part, and again, I think when I was listening to the panel prior to this one, I think George was mentioning about the translation from some sort of research into an actual product. Is one of the biggest challenges, because there's some great research that goes on, no doubt about that, particularly in the UK. There is some fantastic research, but the actual translation of that research into a product is tough. And not always the same skill set of the organisation, of the founder of that particular product or that particular piece of research. They're not always the best person to translate that into the product and through the next stages. So there is a skills gap, particularly here in the UK, around the translation to a product, in essence. The other part that I think Michael was talking about in the session this morning as well was around the regulatory approval and the amount of money that it costs, but also the amount of skill that requires to take a product through the regulatory approval and get that to market. Most of that can't be learned at academic level. It needs to be learned in industry. You can't just sit there and do a course on regulatory approvals. So therefore, quite often, it is more necessary to learn that on the job. For those people that are interested in different routes to try and get into this, one place that I would recommend looking is Cogent Careers Pathways. If you just type that into Google, it discusses or identifies different routes into different areas of the business. So if you want to be a qualified person, as an example, it will talk you through the different routes in towards that particular career. The final side, manufacturing, and again, from my perspective, things like advanced therapy, medicinal products, gene therapy, there aren't many products on the market at the moment. So therefore, being able to bring an individual with that experience into an organisation is tough because there's not that many products out on the market. But people who have got experience of the real depth of technical knowledge within those kind of areas is a really strong foundation from which to build and to work within some of those organisations. Final bit from me was really just to talk a little bit more about the value side of things. Adina mentioned about sort of building a team and working with individuals, co-founders that you can get along with. One thing that's important for everybody in this room, me included, is that you can't be somebody that you're not, that you need to be true to yourself. You need to utilise your own strengths. Now, I brought a copy of a book that we use within our organisation called StrengthsFinder. I don't know whether people have used it. Certainly some of the people I've spoken to last night do use it. And it's a really good, simple tool. You complete an online assessment which you get with the book. But it talks about being able to utilise the strengths of an individual because you will put more energy in if you're acting in an environment where you are using your own strengths as opposed to trying to use your own weaknesses or develop your weaknesses. So if you are building a team, then by building people who have complementary strengths to your own, recognizing actually I'm not particularly focused, as an example, and therefore I need to bring somebody else in who adds to my idea creation and my self-assured ability to go out and do things, but having somebody who's in the organization that can work alongside me and adds the strengths to the discipline and getting the things done that needs to be done, that will create a far stronger team than trying to all just be exactly the same person. And I think I'm out of time. Thank you.
Great. I might take a leaf out of Fiona's book and stand up as well. In fact, I don't know how long you guys have been going. Do you all want to stand up for a minute? Why don't you just stand up? Just stand up. Stretch, do whatever you need to do. I saw a few iPhones coming out then, so I was like, right, now's the time to stand up. All right, guys, take a seat, take a seat. Let me start by saying that it is an absolute pleasure to be here with all of you. It is incredible to be in the presence of 100 people who've been selected from I don't know how many thousands of people by showing your commitment and your desire and your motivation to make things better for yourselves and everyone else. I think that's really terrific and a pleasure to be here with all of my colleagues today. Why don't I just start with what I know best, which is myself, and I'll tell you a bit about that journey, and then I'll tell you a bit about McKinsey, and I'll tell you a bit about how it all comes together. So my name's Brindan Suresh. I grew up in Australia. I was born in Sydney, so I have that in common with Reg, being Australian, and the gentleman over there. And I decided that, I'd work pretty hard and do whatever I could do, and then I'd go to law school because law school seems interesting and you can do lots of things for the world there, and that's exciting. So let me do that. So I went and did that at the University of Sydney, and then towards the end of that, and it still is a very interesting thing to do, but if you want to make a career out of it, you have to often go to somewhere like a corporate law firm or do something like that, and you don't always get to do human rights or you don't get to do criminal law because, frankly, a lot of those people don't have any money to pay you, so then it's like, okay, how can I make a living out of this thing? It's tricky. But still motivated by wanting to do good things for people, I decided I'd go to medical school. So I do that. And that was great too, because that's where you get to have a lot of impact. The feedback loops are quick. People are very grateful for what you do. Terrific stuff. And by the time I was doing all of that, I was what they call a registrar in emergency medicine in Sydney. So I was on the path to sort of finishing my training, but starting to get a little bit frustrated about the ins and outs of the world of medicine. And if any of you have been to a hospital, you will know that the trolleys these days are often in the corridors, blocking up the exits and the entrances. It's a disaster. It's terrible. And then sort of on the personal front, I also had a father with Parkinson's disease. So he had that for about 20, 25 years. So I'm getting a bit frustrated professionally. I'm getting a bit frustrated personally because I can see there's a bit of a dissonance, right? Medicine's all about saving lives, but at home here's someone that's actually struggling a little bit. So what can you do? What can you do to break out of all of this? And I had a friend that worked at McKinsey. And I'm like, interesting, McKinsey. All right, good. They seem to do interesting things. Let me find out a little bit more. And as it turns out, McKinsey has a very big healthcare practice, and that's combined sort of work we do in pharma and work we do with health systems. And we work with health systems around the world. The NHS, it's on the public record that we work with them, so great, do that. And have ended up at McKinsey because, if I'm honest, it is, like we've heard from many people, it is very much a values-driven organization. So we are the world's biggest private partnership, so we're not listed on the stock exchange, we're none of those things, so that means we kind of take a slightly longer-term perspective, a bit like what Fiona was describing. It also means we have a dual mission, is how we describe it. So that dual mission is to ensure that the clients that we work with achieve success, sustainable performance, and all of those things for the longer term. But it also means attracting, developing, and retaining exceptional talent. That's what we see as our dual mission. That's it. There's nothing else that governs what we do. And so you can see very quickly that if you get the second part right, which is having the best people, then you'll be able to do the first part. And if you're doing the first part really right, which is helping our clients, then that's going to excite and motivate our people. And so that's what we're in the business of doing. And so it's a really interesting time to be at McKinsey, like it always has been, I guess, in that less than 50% of the people that we hire now are MBAs. And that's been the case for a little while. So people like Reg and I, we have 200 MDs globally. We have literally hundreds of PhDs. I think we're up to about 800 now. But we're also doing something a bit different. And this is probably the worst possible place to say this, in the hallowed halls of Cambridge. But we've set ourselves a target of hiring 6 people that have never been to university this year. So that's what we're going to do. Why? Because ultimately, it's about what motivates you, what drives you, what can you contribute. And that doesn't always mean people that have multiple degrees like all of us. But what it should tell you is that it's an open-minded employer and workplace. Now, being McKinsey, we love facts, and so we know that it's good and important to be a diverse employer. And we know that it's good to have gender diversity, and we know it's good to have, ethnic diversity and all kinds of whatever is, whether it's someone's sexual persuasion, whatever it might be, we know this is important. But we know it, but do we really know it? And so what we decided to do, being McKinsey, was actually see what happened if you had a more diverse workplace. And so what we've found, looking back at the last 5 years, is those organizations that have the most successful financial performance are the ones that are most diverse. If you have gender diversity, you outrank your industry by 15%. Okay? Those in the top quartile are 15% better performers than those that are not. And if you have greater ethnic diversity, so if you have a workplace that reflects kind of the school, I guess, Fiona's children used to go to, then you have 35% higher performance. 35% higher performance compared to the rest of your industry. So this matters. And so why it matters is because I look at this room and it's fantastic, because this room is what we want to see reflected in our organization and the organizations that we work with. And right now, we're not there. That's a gap. That's a gap. And so what I do at McKinsey is I work with mainly pharmaceutical companies, actually. And what I also try and do is advance the leadership agenda amongst our scientific community. So, because a lot of people in management at big corporations have MBAs, have a commercial or sales and marketing training, they're often people that have come from the lab are not as well equipped, quite frankly, to hold their own in that environment. So what I do, working with a lot of my colleagues, is help grow that. So we heard from the Vice Chancellor yesterday, having good scientific and technological expertise is not enough. What we need are people that, in addition, have business skills, strategic skills, high EQ, the ability to listen, communicate, but also influence. And I don't mean that in a manipulative way. I mean genuinely in being able to move people to a better place. Those are the types of things we're looking for. Those people we often call unicorns because they're hard to find, right? The person that has everything. But the good news is there's a lot that can happen to develop strengths that you might have. In fact, I'm sure many of you have many of those, if not almost all. And the ones that you don't, I think it's worth thinking about, what can I do to help me become a more all-rounded leader? So happy to talk about more of that, but as I said, a real pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Brindan. Fantastic. What I'd like to do, rather than going through my list of questions, I will stop. I've got a couple of questions to finish with, where I'm going to try and pick the brains of each of the panelists for a sort of top tip for you all to take away at the end. But before we get there, I thought let's just put it out to the audience straight away. There's about 20 minutes. I know we have an absolute stop at 1 o'clock, so you can head off to the science park. So we want to make sure we finish on time. So looking out to the audience, who's going to be the brave first 20 people to put their hand up? Fantastic. This lady here. Yeah. Sorry, even with my glasses, I can't see the...
My name's Angela. I'm from New Zealand.
Fantastic.
So on by what the panel has brought up, but it's something that I think is important in attracting and nurturing talent. Two problems. The first one is, I'm sure a lot of people here feel like they've got future insights on how to take the company to the next level, but often who are the decision makers? It's people who are 1 or 2 generations above us, and we are never in the position to influence. So how would we address that disconnect? The second problem is around culture. Often young people pick companies because of the culture it provides. It's great if you're a startup, you can create your culture, but what if you're someone who wants to change the culture in an established company? How do you do that? And not make it just a PR exercise. Thank you.
I'm going to hand those questions over in just a second, but I'll just on the generational point, one thing I know last night when I spoke to some people is that the great thing about an event like this is that you'll be surrounded by people from different networks and backgrounds, and some of the grey-haired members too. Grab their time, get their cards, get their details. It's a great way to network now, and actually that will build that persuasion and influence power later. So, these sorts of opportunities, they don't come around very often. You've all made a great effort to be here. So do make sure you grab the speakers before they dart out the door. And if you can get them for 5 minutes or get their information, then I'd recommend that. Is that okay, all speakers? I should check first. Excellent. So I'm going to pass over, first of all, to Adina, if that's okay.
I don't know that I can comment that well. I mean, because I mean, if I look at who is the management team, I think I'm the youngest person in my company right now. That wasn't always the case, but right now I am. So, in terms of like, how do you become the decision maker? Well, you could start your own company. That is a real option. And then in terms of how you change culture of large organizations, I have 0 experience in that, so I can't help you there. But maybe you
Just so
can.
happens.
Yeah. So in AstraZeneca, with the new CEO, he wanted to shape a new culture. I mean, he actually has, you can't do it alone. 60,000 employees, 100 countries, and words mean different things in different cultures. But he has actually been quite successful in introducing new values. So there's 5 values, for example, in AstraZeneca, and people had a say. So I think the question was, how can you shape it? People had a say to the values. So it was sort of quite a sort of iterative process. So our values are follow the science and do the right thing, put the patient first, play to win, be entrepreneurial. And we evaluate people in their performance reviews against these values. Well, yes, you really pushed the boundaries. You were playing to win, but you didn't do the right thing here. So sorry, not going to give you points for that. So you sort of, it's difficult, to shape a value in a global company. But you have to be very, very consistent, and you have to be a strong role model. And integrity in our industry is absolutely fundamental, and it's not black and white. And so, for me, doing the right thing is very, very important. Then we do employee surveys, and so lots of other companies, and obviously I'm talking about AstraZeneca, do employee surveys, and then you have like action plans when you get surveys like, well, leadership is pretty crap, or you don't communicate enough, or it's anonymous, right? Completely anonymous, and these are really actually quite important because it's data points as to how you're doing in terms of your culture. I hope that helps.
One thing that I would add to that is particularly for anybody embarking on a new career or looking at a new organisation to go and work for, is that selection process isn't just a one-way street. It isn't for us as employers to try and find out about you. It's about for you to find out about the organisation and whether it's a company that you fit the values for. So yes, you might want to try and shape certain things about an organisation and whatever else. And certainly, the guys that are in this room, you will have ideas, and you would want to look for an organisation that listens to the employees. But make sure that at the first hurdle, that it's not something that completely jars with your own values as well, that you're comfortable joining that organisation for the right reasons. And explore that as much as you possibly can do at interview and selection stage.
Brindan?
Thanks. Yeah, we have a value called the obligation to dissent. And so what that means is no matter how junior a person, if we are in the process of trying to crack a problem, that person not only has the right to speak up and say that they agree or disagree, but they actually have an obligation to do so. It's not good enough to sit on your hands and then say something later on when you had the opportunity earlier. And I say that not because it's right for every organization. Some organizations are more hierarchical. The military probably wouldn't work that way, right? If every time someone has to decide something, someone else says, well, hang on. But we have a different culture and a different organizational mindset. So whether you're starting your own organization, whether you're joining an organization, I think as the others said, think about those types of things. Look for those types of things. Yeah. And I would just urge you to not have the mindset of being the youngest person in the room, okay? You're there because you have a contribution and a value, and never underestimate that, never.
Yeah. I should say the obligation to dissent, not so good with families. Great.
They do that anyway.
Get feedback the whole time.
Fantastic. Okay, we've got a lot. Just up there. Yeah. That individual there. Thank you.
Hi, I'm a neurobiologist. I work in Basel, Switzerland. I want to know from people in the big pharma, because I have seen a lot happening around me in Novartis and Roche. How do you cope with the fact that big pharma are subject to very often big decision and restructuring, and they have to either change people from a division to another one or lay off people? How do you cope with the fact that if you really want to attract and retain talent, you have to give them a chance to grow in a way that they will find a better place every day when they come to work? You cannot just choose the best of a division and then lay off the others. This is not possible in big pharma. You either close a part of it or you have it. So how do you cope with the fact that you grow your people? I know what McKinsey does about it, but how does pharma plan to do this? Because this is a very strong critic that I often hear from PhDs and postdocs who want to drop science, academic science, and go to industry.
That's a great question. What I'm going to suggest is that Fiona and Richard answer that, because you have two contrasting views. Obviously there's the recruitment perspective, but there's also the big pharma perspective. So.
Yeah. I mean, so change and changes in organizations is a fact of life. So, I mean, that we have to accept. So we're never going to have complete and utter stability. And unfortunately, you try and avoid layoffs and you try and avoid restructurings, but sometimes it's necessary. So, for example, if we look at AstraZeneca and the story of AstraZeneca, we had some very, big products that have lost their patent, and obviously you have sales force on those products. The new products are more specialistic, and therefore you need less sales reps, or you just go to you need to visit less physicians because it's more specialty care, oncology, rather than going to many, many GPs. You do a restructure. You have to do a restructuring. It's demotivating keeping people doing, jobs that don't have a meaning for the company or can't make a big impact or a difference. The important thing is, how do you do the restructuring? How do you treat your employees? Can you create an alumni? Can you can you do outplacement? Can you help them find another job? But restructurings, I'm afraid to say, is a fact of all, not just big pharma, but all corporations. We have to be able to adapt and flex according to what the pipeline. In pharma, it's true there's very long term, but suddenly, we don't know, a clinical trial readout doesn't go the way we think, and it's discontinued. And, depending on what's going on in the company, sometimes you have to lay people off. You've built up a whole sales force. It happened in Roche with dalcetrapib and cardiovascular. We thought we were going to be leaders in cardiovascular, all these fantastic things. We brought in a lot of great skilled people, and it was futile. The trial read out. It was just completely, it was worthless.
Well, how do you equip them for the next step? What is your strategy for doing so?
So some people we try and redeploy, and we open positions. We have a selection process, but for those people who don't manage to find another job, even though we help them, there's a lot of work involved. we give them outplacement services, and they leave the company, and we help them find another job. So there's professionals who do that. That's how we do it.
It's worth mentioning, of course, that's not just a big pharma issue. I mean, PTC, for instance, with their recent situation with, for Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, their product, that's had a problem with the FDA. They're having to make cuts. So it's not just, big pharma that suffers from that. But I was going to say, Richard, do you have a thought on this? Because you're from a...
Yeah, I mean, certainly from our perspective as an agent, as a recruitment consultant, we support companies like AstraZeneca, any organisation that's going through some period of change. And as Fiona mentioned, change, it happens, and it will always happen. If there's one constant, it is change. And so whenever that happens, as an organisation from SRG's perspective, it's about going in, understanding the needs of the individuals that are concerned within and are potentially going to be displaced through the restructure, and working with them as to what their career options could be and where they could look to work. I think Reg mentioned within his speech, and he had A to B, and at the start he had quite a little bit of it. It's still on that little on the screen down there, but at the start quite a few different zigzags. Within a career, you will very rarely find an individual that just has this amazing plotted single line that takes them from A to B. And there will be so many different zigzags, and I think what Big Pharma does really, really well is that for an individual to progress their career, they may well take 2 or 3 sideways steps into different areas of their business before taking a forward step. Reg's CV, just looking at the background there, from sort of sales and marketing to obviously the physician side, but also sort of working within lots of different areas within AstraZeneca as country manager and in his current role around partnering, that actually some of those different career options and the different avenues for him further down the line, and Fiona, close your ears, but those will help him if he does ever decide to leave the AZ MedImmune organisation, because he's got exposure to so many different aspects. And I think that's one thing that large pharmaceutical companies, but large companies in general, are quite adept at doing, is being able to give people different skill sets as they've developed their career.
And sorry, Brindan, it just makes me think as well, given that you often advise companies and you may be aware of launch or things that are coming, what would be your advice if a company was facing that situation? Hypothetically, you're managing a team and you suddenly get this news, what would you suggest they...
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, look, I can only emphasize what Fiona said about change. It's a fact of life. There's change in our own organisation. People come and go. And a lot of it, frankly, is based on performance, and that's the nature of the world we live in. But we should I think, not make the mistake of thinking that we should keep people on because it's the right thing to do. Rather, we should do the right thing by those people. So if it is the case that whether it's a McKinsey or whether it's an AstraZeneca, they're not finding the right opportunities, I actually think we have an obligation to help them find the right opportunities, either inside, in a different role, or outside somewhere else. But I think none of us are in the business of saying, thank you, goodbye. I mean, I don't think anybody would prescribe to that. The other thing, of course, is we are in a very exciting time in the industry. So a few years ago, this was a hugely relevant conversation. I mean, it always is. But now, in a period where there are so many terrific products coming on tap, we're almost there. So many organizations gearing up for launch. I would say the mindset is actually very different now. There is a war for talent. These gentlemen know it better than anybody, and Fiona knows it. So this is an exciting time. This is an exciting time, and I'd take that mindset.
Yeah. Thank you, that's helpful. Could I also have a question for Adina? I'm thinking about any questions related to smaller businesses as well, because you've travelled a long way. The benefit of advice about being an entrepreneur. I think a number of you here will end up running your own businesses, I'm sure. So, yeah.
Hi, my name is Raphael Chow. I am a strategy consultant at Monitor Deloitte in London. And this question is for Adina. You said very early on at the inception of Spiral Genetics, you had to very rapidly go through 6 CTOs. Can you tell us a little bit more about that experience? I can hardly imagine how it was like to go through that.
Yeah, I mean, it was really the reason why there were 6 is because, you know, you're looking for the right person. And it's not just the technical skill set. I mean, there was certainly some of that, but it was also just personality and values. You know, we talked a lot about values earlier. And, you know, the co-founders of a company really set the culture for the entire company going forward, especially when you're small. I mean, if you're a tiny, you know, company, 3 people is like, it's like the entire company, or it's half the company, you know? And so finding somebody that, I mean, we were looking for a lot of things. We were looking for somebody that was technically brilliant, but in addition, really had an interest and the ability to pick up bio very quickly. I mean, because like in 2009, there just weren't that many people, computer scientists, that actually had any background in bio. And he was the closest thing that we could really get. And we originally came from the other side thinking like, oh, let's get bio people that know computer science. But that actually didn't work really well at all. It really had to go the other way. We were looking for a computer scientist that knew about bio because it was easier to teach that direction. So it was that. And then the other thing is that from a technical perspective, we really needed somebody that could do the Vulkan mind meld with Becky, like, because that's like how all of the innovations happened. And so a lot of it was really around like how, like, what is the dynamic and the creative dynamic between these 2 individuals and having somebody that's polished enough that I can put in front of investors and VCs and all of those things that really led to that kind of quick succession of like, nope, you're not the right one, nope, you're not the right one. And having the patience to wait it out. Because when you're starting a company, there's like this like urgency. I forget, there was a woman yesterday that was like, I just want to do it now. And I get it, right? We just want to do it now. But having the patience to wait for the right person makes all the difference, because they're going on this journey with you. And it's really hard to get a divorce from a co-founder. Like, I mean, it's tough in personal life, and it's the same in business. And so waiting for the right person means like dating. You got to like date until you find the right person.
And very quick follow-up on this, sorry. So what was the timeline for this? And also, getting through the first one, second one, good. But as you get to the 4th one, the 5th one, when you're almost right, how do you know that they're still the wrong person?
That's not a quick question.
So, honestly, that's a gut thing. It really is. And then, sorry, the first part of your question. Oh, timeline. 9 months of, you know, kind of, I mean, it was a long time, especially in startup land. That's a long time. And you never know where they're going to come from. I mean, I ultimately met Jeremy through a Japanese tea ceremony buddy. I'm serious. So you don't know where they're going to come from. Like, you're continually pitching all the time, like, to all of the people that are around you, being like, I'm looking for this person, I'm looking for this person. And then the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon happens, and then you get Jeremy, right? So, I mean, that's how it really is done. Yeah.
What I'd like to do quickly is I'm going to ask the panel each a question just about a sort of top tip to offer you to take away. And then if we'll time, we'll have one more question from the audience. So, if we start with you, what would be the one thing that you would recommend for this fantastic, diverse group of individuals who've come over, for them to take away from today about the people gap?
If you're thinking about starting your own company, be really clear about what impact you want to have on the world. Because starting a company is really, really hard. It's really hard. It will challenge you in ways that you never thought you would. And it's really only worth the pain if, I'm serious, it's really only worth the pain if you are irrationally passionate about the thing that you are going after and you're really clear about what impact you want to have on the world. And make sure that the co-founders that you pick want to go on that same irrational journey with you. And getting really clear about what it is that you want to do in the world, like how you want to impact the world. It sounds, you know, it sounds like a crazy thing to know. I mean, oftentimes, you know, you have conversations with people that are in their 30s, 40s, 50s that still don't know like what they want to be when they grow up, really. But you can actually answer that question now, and like, you know, as Reg was asking at the beginning, like, well, where do you want to be in 40 years? Like, what legacy do you want to leave behind? I think that asking that question now gives you a huge amount of clarity about what choices you're going to make and what you really care about. So that way, if you do start a company, it's worth your time and worth your pain, frankly.
Thank you. That's great. Fiona?
I think if you want to join a big company, We consider ourselves a medium company, actually. Let's say a large company. I think the best way to do that, because remember, you're always in the driver's seat, always. You're the ones who are deciding. Of course, we interview you, but you need to really understand whether it's the best thing for you. So you're always in the driver's seat. I think the best way to get to know a company is through either an internship or a graduate program, or depending where you are, PhD. So we use these programs as pipeline, or through a collaboration. If you're a startup, there's so many collaborations and partnerships, and you may not actually you want the best of both worlds. You want to be part of a startup, but you want to have collaboration with a large company as well. So, you don't lose that ambition of being an entrepreneur. So I think that's the best thing. Try and have clear ideas, even if you're a bit like Reg, that you weren't sure where to go, but there are some things that you know that you want. And it may be values, it may be location, but be really clear about those. Be really, really clear about who you are, what you love doing, because you'll be amazing when you go into a company, because you love doing that and you've gone after it. I think those are I would say those are the most important things. I know I'm going to come up with another 10 I should have said, but I'll stop.
It's okay.
For me, I think being open and flexible, having a plan in mind of where you want to go and things like that, but acknowledging that the world today will not be the same in 20 years' time, in 40 years' time. The amount of science and technology and things that are being developed over and the pace of that change at the moment is unbelievable, and therefore being able to sometimes ride the roller coaster a little bit of what that can look like will stand you in really good stead. And just to follow on Fiona's point, Fiona mentioned there about sort of being, your passion will shine through. If it's something that you really enjoy and you really want to do and achieve, your passion will shine through. So if it was just to sum up in a single sentence, it would be you, but be the best you that you can be.
Thank you. Very good. Agree. I think that a common pitfall for really smart people, of which that's all of you, is that you think you always need to be really smart. And so that means a couple of things. It means that you will solve problems on your own, okay? And because that's what being smart means. And you'll put on a game face, because whether that involves wearing a suit, which I happen to be doing today, but don't always, whether that means that you should act a certain way because that's how a professor acts, or that's how the head of the cardiology department acts. Whatever it might be, don't do that, right? Trust yourself. Drop the game face. Be open. Have conversations. Be vulnerable. There's nothing wrong with that, okay? It is a good thing. And I'm pretty sure when Reg spoke to 300 people, he got 1,500 pieces of advice. But fine, so be it. Because then it all comes back to what we just heard, which is, be clear where you want to go. Trust yourself in your own judgment and your own passion. Go after it, but go after it by being open.
Fantastic. We have stopped exactly on, 101, which isn't bad. But if you could join me and show appreciation for the panel staff, Adina, Fiona, Richard, and Brindan.